Hey, welcome to another episode of Coffee HEMA with me, Jamie McKeever, where I try and make a point about HEMA and the time it takes to make a coffee. Today, two things. First of all, before we get in, from now, if you look in the description for this video on YouTube, you'll find that there's a form that you can submit if you want to ask me a specific question or to cover a specific topic. It could be anything you want. It doesn't have to be to do with any of the videos I've had so far, but it could be if you want me to elaborate on a point. And that'll be in both this video and all videos going forward, and all videos in the past. I'll go back and change it for all that. So just if you want to hear something, if you want to hear my opinion on something, ask away. I'll be happy to make a video about it. So for today, I want to talk about, still on the topic of safety, I want to talk about tournament rules and how they affect safety at the tournament. But rather than focus on sort of this as a generic question, I want to specifically dive into hit quality rules. There's some obvious things about what we ban and ban targets or whatever. I'm not going to talk about that today. I might in future. But hit quality rules are something that has actually a really significant effect on the safety in the tournament, and often isn't really considered or isn't fully considered from the safety angle. When designing rule sets. And there's kind of two aspects to that, right? Most tournaments have some element of hit quality, right? There are some that don't, and they're really annoying because, you'll kind of be closing the grapple and the flat of the blade will gently graze your shoulder and suddenly you got hit, right? But most tournaments have some level of saying, this is a good hit, this is not a good hit, whatever criteria goes into that. And different criteria are used across different tournaments and different individuals. In fact, this is probably the area with the most inconsistency between judging across HEMA. So it might be to do with the edge, which edge, right? Some weapons, they might say the back edge doesn't count, like saber, or is a flat is scored. Some tournaments do score a flat. Sometimes people talk about range of motion, so how the arc of the cut or the length of travel for the blade. Flex on the blade is another common one. I'll come back to that. And one thing that comes up sometimes is sort of strength of the hit, right? Either implicitly or explicitly. And the obvious one of those that kind of leads to some issues is adding strength of hit into your hit quality rules, particularly with this thing I'm going to talk about later. But when this becomes an issue, if someone's hit is being judged as low quality, if that is one of the criteria, often what will happen then is they'll say, okay, that wasn't low quality, so I need to hit harder, right? Even if it was for some other reason, the flat or whatever it happens to be. Bend of blade in a thrust is similar, particularly with relatively stiff weapons like longsword, right? It doesn't directly mean hit them harder, but if you want to get blend in your sword, there are kind of two ways you can force that. One is by putting more pressure on it, hitting harder. The other is by putting lateral pressure on it, which is just, it will make your blade bend easier. It's not particularly good fencing. It's not particularly something that matters for the hit quality, but it will make it look bendy, that's for sure. So putting in criteria like bend of blade, like force, directly into your hit quality rules will directly have a detriment to the safety. And particularly if you do what most tournaments do when a hit is low quality, which is not provide any information to the fencers about why it was judged low quality. The Wessex League, where I run, the head judge will give a story about how they think the exchange happens, and if they are judging something as low quality, they will say why. They will say, I saw the action from blue fencer, but it was the flat of the blade rather than the edge, so it's low quality. Or there was no deliberate cutting action, so it's low quality. If you don't tell them what's happening, even if the hit quality rules are not particularly explicitly including force, generally speaking, fencers pumped through with adrenaline, who aren't thinking particularly clearly, given the situations and the stresses involved, will default to, okay, they didn't see my hit. I need to make it clearer, which means going harder, going faster, bigger cutting motion, that kind of stuff, right? Even worse if you don't even call out that the hit was called out low quality rather than not hit. So if you want to include hit quality in your tournament, and I'm a firm believer that you should, think about these things when you're designing those rules. How will the judges tell the fencer what their being criteria, what the criteria they failed on for hit quality, to make sure that they don't default to just hit harder, and consider really carefully whether you want to put things like hitting hard or hitting with force or bend in the thrusting blade into your hit quality rules, depending on the weapon that you happen to use. Right, you know, bend on the blade in a small sword tournament is a very different consideration than bend on the blade in a long sword tournament. This kind of this kind of accidental incentive is an issue for other aspects of tournament rules as well. I'm not going to talk about it today. Kajetan Sadowski had a good post on this ages back where he was talking about how promoting hitting the head or different kinds of stuff also has a safety effect. So these things need to be considered too. But I'm out of time for the day because my coffee is definitely brewing at this point. So have fun and think carefully when designing tournament rules.